Ouch, such agony, my head is throbbing, the bizarre dream full of whispers shattered abruptly. Zhou Mingrui, in his deep sleep, felt an excruciating pain in his head, as if he had been struck by a stick. No, it felt more like a sharp object pierced into his temple and stirred. In his drowsiness, Zhou Mingrui tried to turn over, to cover his head, to sit up, but his limbs were completely unresponsive. His body seemed to have lost control that I must still be dreaming. Maybe I will even experience that feeling of thinking I've woken up but still being asleep. Familiar with such experiences, Zhou Mingrui strived to focus his will to break free from the darkness and illusions. However, in the state of half asleep and half awake, his will was as elusive as smoke, hard to control, hard to gather. No matter how hard he tried, his thoughts kept wandering, random ideas popping up. Why would I suddenly have a headache in the middle of the night, and it's so severe? Could it be a cerebral hemorrhage or something? I'm not going to die young, am I? Wake up. Wake up, hey, it doesn't seem as painful as before. But it still feels like a blunt knife is slowly cutting into my brain. Seems like I won't be able to sleep anymore. How am I going to work tomorrow? Why am I thinking about work? With a real headache, of course, I should take a day off. No need to fear the manager's nagging. Thinking about it, it doesn't seem so bad. Stealing half a day of leisure, the recurring pain allowed Zhou Mingrui to gather his strength bit by bit. Finally, with a burst of energy, he sat up and opened his eyes, completely breaking free from the state of half asleep and half awake. His vision was first blurred, then covered with a faint crimson hue. Zhou Mingrui saw a wooden desk in front of him. In the center of the desk was an open notebook. The paper was coarse and yellowish, and a sentence was written in strange letters. The ink was deep black and eye-catching. To the left of the notebook, near the edge of the table, was a stack of neatly arranged books, about 7 or 8. On the wall to the right of the books, there was a gray pipe and a wall lamp connected to the pipe. The lamp had a classic Western style, about half the size of a person's head. The inner layer was made of transparent glass, and the outside was surrounded by a black metal grid. Below the extinguished wall lamp, a black ink bottle was covered with a faint red glow, and the raised pattern on the surface formed a vague angel pattern. In front of the ink bottle, to the right of the notebook, a plump dark-colored pen lay quietly. The pen tip shimmered with a faint light, and the cap was placed next to a revolver with a brass color. A gun? A revolver? Zhou Mingrui froze completely. Everything he saw was so unfamiliar, nothing like his own room. While being astonished and confused, he found that the desk, notebook, ink bottle, and revolver were all covered with a layer of crimson veil, which was the light coming in from the window. Subconsciously, he lifted his head, and his gaze moved up bit by bit. In the middle of the air, above the black velvet curtain, a crimson full moon hung high, quietly shining. This. Zhou Mingrui felt an inexplicable horror, suddenly stood up, but before his legs were fully straightened, his head throbbed again. This caused him to lose his strength momentarily. His center of gravity involuntarily fell, and his buttocks hit the hard wooden chair heavily. Smack. The pain didn't affect him. Zhou Mingrui pressed his hand on the table and stood up again, panicking and turning around to observe the environment he was in. This was a small room, with a brown door on each side, and a wooden bunk bed against the wall opposite. Between the bed and the left door was a cabinet, with an open top and 5 drawers. Below. At the edge of the cabinet, at a person's height, there was also a gray pipe embedded in the wall, but it was connected to a strange mechanical device, with some gears and bearings exposed. Near the corner of the right wall, close to the desk, were piles of things that looked like coal stoves, as well as soup pots, iron pots, and other kitchen utensils. Beyond the right door was a dressing mirror with 2 cracks. The wooden base had simple and rustic patterns. At a glance, Zhou Mingrui vaguely saw himself in the mirror, his current self, black hair, brown eyes, linen shirt, thin body, ordinary features, deep contours. This. Zhou Mingrui gasped in shock, his heart filled with many helpless and chaotic guesses. The revolver, the European and American classic-style decoration, and the crimson moon that was different from the Earth, all indicated an event. Did I time travel? Zhou Mingrui's mouth opened slightly. He grew up reading web novels and often fantasized about such experiences, but when it really happened, he found it hard to accept. This is probably what they call loving the idea more than the reality, right? After a few seconds, Zhou Mingrui made a sarcastic comment to himself. If it weren't for the persistent headache that kept his mind tense and clear, he would have doubted whether he was dreaming. Calm down, calm down, calm down. He took a few deep breaths, trying to make himself less panicked. Just then, as his body and mind calmed down, fragments of memories suddenly popped up, slowly appearing in his mind. Klein Moretti, a resident of Tianjin City, Ahova County, Lone Kingdom, the northern continent, just graduated from the history department of Hoi University. His father was a sergeant in the Royal Army and died in the colonial conflict in the southern continent. The compensation he received allowed Klein to attend a private grammar school, laying the foundation for his university admission. His mother was a follower of the goddess of the night and died the year Klein passed the entrance exam of Hoi University. He also has a brother and a sister, living together in a 2-bedroom apartment. The family is not wealthy, even can be said to be poor, currently relying on the brother who works as a clerk in an import and export company to support, as a Graduate of the history department, Klein mastered the ancient Fushark language, which is known as the source of the languages of the northern countries, and the Hermes text, which often appears in ancient tombs and is related to sacrifices and prayers. Hermes text. Zhou Mingrui's heart moved. He reached out and pressed his throbbing temple, looking at the notebook on the desk, feeling the text on the yellowish paper changing from strange to unfamiliar, from unfamiliar to familiar, from familiar to readable. This was a sentence written in Hermes text. The deep black ink read, "Everyone will die, including me." Hiss. Zhou Mingrui was inexplicably terrified, his body instinctively leaning back, trying to distance himself from the notebook, from the sentence that he was very weak and almost fell. He quickly reached out to hold the edge of the table, feeling the air around him becoming restless, and there seemed to be faint whispers echoing in his ears, reminding him of the feeling when he listened to scary stories from his elders when he was a child. Shaking his head, it was all an illusion. Zhou Mingrui stood up again, moving his gaze away from the notebook, and started to pant heavily. At this moment, his gaze fell on the revolver with a brass glow, and a question suddenly popped up in his mind. With Klein's family situation, where would he get the money and the means to buy a gun? Zhou Mingrui couldn't help but frown. In his contemplation, he suddenly noticed a half-read handprint on the edge of the desk. The color was deeper than the moonlight and thicker than the veil. That was a blood handprint. Blood handprint? Zhou Mingrui subconsciously flipped over his right hand that had just held the edge of the table, and looked down to find his palm and fingers covered in blood. At the same time, the throbbing in his head was still there, slightly weakened, but continuous. Did I hit my head? Zhou Mingrui guessed as he turned around and walked towards the cracked dressing mirror. After a few steps, a medium-sized figure with black hair and brown eyes, and a noticeable scholarly air, clearly reflected in his eyes. Is this me now, Klein Moretti? Zhou Mingrui paused, because the light was not good enough in the middle of the night, he couldn't see clearly. So he continued to move forward until he was only one step away from hitting the mirror. In the faint crimson moonlight, he tilted his head to check the condition of his temple. The clear reflection of the mirror truthfully showed a hideous wound on his temple, the edges were scorched, and it was covered in blood. Thump, thump, thump. Zhou Mingrui recoiled several steps, startled by the sight before him. It wasn't his reflection in the mirror, but rather a mummified corpse. How could someone with such severe wounds still be alive? He tilted his head in disbelief, examining the other side. Even at a distance, under dim light, the piercing wound and deep red bloodstains were still evident. Zhou Mingrui took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He placed his hand over his left chest, feeling the vigorous, rapid beating of his heart. He touched his exposed skin. The slight coolness masked a warm flow beneath. After squatting down to confirm his knees could still bend, Zhou Mingrui stood up again, no longer panicked. "What's going on?" he murmured, intending to inspect his head wound more carefully. Taking 2 steps forward, he suddenly stopped. The blood moon's light outside the window was too dim to support his careful inspection. A fragment of memory surfaced, and Zhou Mingrui turned his gaze to the wall next to the desk, where a gray pipe and a metal grid encased a wall lamp. This was a mainstream gas lamp, with a stable flame and excellent lighting. Originally, given Klein Moretti's family situation, even a kerosene lamp was a luxury, let alone a gas lamp. Using candles would have been more appropriate for his status. But 4 years ago, when he was studying late into the night for his university entrance exam, his brother Benson felt that his studies were crucial for their family's future. Even if they had to borrow money, they should create the best conditions for him. Of course, Benson, who had been literate and working for several years, was not reckless or devoid of means. He persuaded the landlord to pay for the basic transformation under the pretext that installing a gas pipeline would enhance the grade of the apartment and facilitate future rentals. Benson himself, leveraging his convenience of working for an import and export company, obtained a new gas lamp almost at cost. In the end, he only used his savings and did not have to borrow money from anyone. As the memory faded, Zhou Mingrui returned to his desk, opened the gas valve and turned on the gas lamp. Click, 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 the sound of ignition echoed, but the light did not come on as Zhou Mingrui expected. Click, click, click. He turned it a few more times, but the gas lamp remained dark. He withdrew his hand, pressing his left temple, forcing out fragments of memory, seeking the cause of the problem. After a few seconds, he turned around, walked to the side of the main door, and arrived in front of a mechanical device embedded in the wall and connected by a gray pipe. This was a gas meter. After observing the exposed gears and bearings, Zhou Mingrui took out a coin from his pocket. Its color was dark yellow, flashing with a copper glow. The front was engraved with the head of a crowned man, and the back was surrounded by wheat stalks with the number 1. Zhou Mingrui knew that this was the most basic currency of the Lone Kingdom, called a copper penny. The actual purchasing power of 1 penny was roughly equivalent to 3 to 4 yuan before he crossed over. This currency also had 5 pennies, half a penny, and a quarter of a penny, but it was still not delicate enough. In daily life, one still had to round up when purchasing items. After flipping the coin, which was issued when King George III ascended to the throne, Zhou Mingrui pinched it and inserted it into the thin, vertically opened mouth of the gas meter. Ding, ding, dong, with the pennies fall inside the meter, the sound of gears turning immediately followed, playing a short and beautiful mechanical melody. Zhou Mingrui watched for a few seconds, then returned to his wooden desk, turning the gas lamp. Switch again, click, 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 pop, a flame ignited, quickly growing larger. The bright light first occupied the interior of the wall lamp, then passed through the transparent glass, casting a warm color over the room. The darkness abruptly retreated, and the crimson left the window. Zhou Mingrui felt somewhat relieved, quickly stepping in front of the dressing mirror. This time, he scrutinized his temple, not missing a single detail. After several comparisons, he noticed that aside from the initial bloodstains, no more fluid seeped from the ghastly wound. It was as if it had been well bandaged and stopped from bleeding. The slowly wriggling gray brain and the flesh of the wound growing at a visible speed suggested that healing was on the way. Perhaps in 30 to 40 minutes, or 2 to 3 hours, only a faint scar would remain. A healing effect brought about by crossing over. Zhou Mingrui raised the corner of his right mouth, murmuring silently. Then, he took a long breath. Regardless of the reason, at least he was still alive. Composing himself, he opened the drawer, took out a small piece of soap, and picked a towel from the old rag hanging next to the cupboard. Then he opened the door and headed to the communal bathroom on the second floor for tenants. He needed to clean the blood on his head. It was okay to scare himself, but if he frightened his sister Melissa, who had to get up early the next day, it would be hard to manage. The corridor outside was pitch black, with only the crimson moonlight from the window at the end barely outlining the protruding objects. They looked like a pair of monstrous eyes silently watching the living in the deep night. Zhou Mingrui walked lightly, somewhat timidly, towards the bathroom. Once inside, the moonlight was brighter, and everything became clear. Zhou Mingrui stood in front of the washstand and turned on the tap. The rushing sound of water brought to Zhou Mingrui's mind the landlord, Mr. Frank. Since the water bill was included in the rent, the short and skinny gentleman, dressed in a top hat, waistcoat, and black suit, was always eager to patrol several washrooms, eavesdropping the sound of running water. If the sound of water was too loud, Mr. Franch would throw away his gentlemanly demeanor, fiercely waving his cane, banging on the bathroom door, and shouting loudly, "Damn thief, waste is shameful, I remember you, if I see you do it again, pack your dirty luggage and get out. Believe me, this is the most cost-effective apartment in the whole city of Tianjin, you won't find a more generous landlord than me." Pulling back his thoughts, Zhou Mingrui wet his towel and began to clean the blood stains on his face, over and over again. After looking at the battered mirror in the bathroom and confirming only the hideous wounds and pale face remained, Zhou Mingrui felt much better. He then took off his linen shirt and scrubbed the blood spots with soap. At that moment, he frowned, considering the possibility of more trouble. The wounds were exaggerated, and there were many blood stains, not just on his body, but also in the room. After a few minutes, Zhou Mingrui finished cleaning his linen shirt, took the wet towel and quickly returned home. He first wiped the blood handprint on the desk, then relied on the light of the gas lamp to search for other residues. On searching, he immediately found many blood spots splattered on the floor and under the desk, and there was a yellow bullet head on the left wall. Did he put the revolver against his temple and fired a shot? The clues connected instantly, and Zhou Mingrui roughly understood Klein's cause of death. He didn't rush to verify it but first conscientiously wiped off the bloodstains and handled the scene. Then, he picked up the bullet head, returned to the desk, opened the revolver's cylinder to the left, and poured out the bullets inside. Click, 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 a total of 5 bullets, 1 shell, all flowing with a brass luster. Indeed. Zhou Mingrui glanced at the empty shell, while putting the bullets back into the cylinder one by one, nodding slightly. His gaze shifted to the left, looking at the sentence "Everyone will die, including me" written on the open notebook, and more questions emerged in his mind. Where did the gun come from? Was it suicide, or was it staged as suicide? What kind of trouble could a history graduate of civilian origin get into? How could this method of suicide leave so little blood? Was it because I crossed over in time and brought a healing benefit? After pondering for a moment, Zhou Mingrui put on another linen shirt, sat down in the chair, and began to think about more important things. Klein's fate is not his main concern at the moment. The real problem is to figure out why he crossed over, and whether he can cross back. Parents, relatives, best friends, the rich and colorful internet world, all kinds of food, these are all urgent reasons to want to go back. Click, click, click. Zhou Mingrui's right hand unconsciously flung out the revolver's cylinder, and then closed it back, over and over again. There's not much difference between now and before, it's just a bit unlucky. How could I cross over inexplicably? Unlucky. Yes, I performed a luck-changing ceremony before dinner tonight. A bolt of lightning flashed across Zhou Mingrui's mind, illuminating the memories hidden by the FOG.AS, a qualified keyboard politician, keyboard historian, keyboard economist, keyboard biologist, keyboard folklorist. He always claimed to know a little about everything. Of course, his best friend often mocked him as knowing only a little about everything, and magic is one of them. Last year when he returned to his hometown, he found a book called Chen Hansheng Secret Magic Essentials at an old bookstall. He thought it looked interesting and would help him show off on the internet, so he bought it. Unfortunately, his interest was short-lived. The vertical version made it hard to read, and he only flipped through the beginning before throwing the book into a corner. It wasn't until recently, when he had a string of bad luck, losing his phone, clients running away, making mistakes at work, and all sorts of bad things happening one after another, that he remembered there was a luck-changing ceremony at the beginning of Magic Essentials. The requirements were extremely simple and did not require any foundation. You just needed to prepare 4 servings of the staple food of your region and place them in the 4 corners of the room. This could be on the table, on the cabinet, etc. Then stand in the center of the room, walk a square in a counterclockwise direction in 4 steps. With the first step, you silently chant Fuxing Xianhuang Immortal, the second step, chant Fuxing Xianhuang Tianjun, the third step, chant Fuxing Xianhuang Shangdi, and the fourth step, chant Fuxing Xianhuang Tianzuan. After completing the walk, close your eyes and wait in place for 5 minutes. The ceremony would then be considered successful. With the mentality that it didn't cost anything, he dug out that book and did it once before dinner. However, nothing happened at the time. Who knew that in the middle of the night, he actually crossed over? There's a good chance it was that luck-changing ceremony. I'll try it here tomorrow. If it really is because of it, then there's hope I can cross back. Zhou Mingrui stopped the action of flicking the revolver's cylinder and suddenly sat up straight. No matter what, he had to try to save a dead horse as if it were alive. Once the plan was set, Zhou Mingrui felt as if he had found his backbone, all his fear, hesitation, and unease shrinking into a corner. Only at this moment did he have the peace of mind to carefully examine the residual memories of Klein. Zhou Mingrui habitually stood up, shut off the pipe valve, watched the wall lamp slowly dim until it went out, and then sat down again. Unconsciously, he caressed the brass cylinder of the revolver, pressing his temple in the dark stained with a crimson hue, quietly reminiscing like the most focused audience in a movie theater. Perhaps due to the impact of the bullet, Klein's memories were like shattered glass, not only losing continuity but also missing content in many places. For example, where did the finely crafted revolver come from? Was it suicide or homicide? What did the phrase, "everyone will die, including me," written in the notebook mean? Did he participate in any strange events 2 days before the incident? Not only were these specific memories fragmented and incomplete, but so was the knowledge he had. From his current state, Zhou Mingrui believed that if Klein were to return to university, he would probably not be able to graduate, even though he had only left campus a few days ago and had not slacked off at all. In 2 days, I have to attend an interview at the history department of Tianjin University. The universities in the Lone Kingdom have a tradition that graduates do not directly stay in school. The tutor gave a recommendation letter to Tianjin University and one to Beckland University. As Zhou Mingrui silently watched, the red moon outside the window slanted westward, gradually sinking until the dawn light appeared in the east, and the horizon was dyed golden. This time, there was a movement in the room, and soon, footsteps approached the isolation door. Melissa is awake. She's as punctual as ever. Zhou Mingrui gave a faint smile. Influenced by Klein's memories, he felt like he was looking at his own little sister when he saw Melissa. However, I don't have a little sister. He then muttered to himself. Melissa was different from Benson and Klein. Her primary education was not completed in the Sunday school of the Church of the Goddess of the Night. When she reached the age of schooling, the Lone Kingdom enacted the elementary education law, established a low and middle education committee, and specifically provided funding, greatly increasing investment. In just 3 years, on the premise of incorporating many church schools, a large number of public primary schools were established, strictly adhering to the principle of religious neutrality, not involving the disputes of the Church of the Lord of Storms, the Goddess of the Night, and the God of Steam and Machinery. Compared with the Sunday school that only costs a penny a week, the public primary school's tuition of 3 pennies a week seems quite expensive, but the former only studies 1 day a week on Sundays, while the latter has to go to school 6 days a week. On the whole, it's almost free. Melissa was different from most girls. She liked gears, springs, and bearings since she was a child and aspired to be a steam mechanic. Benson, who had suffered from cultural losses and understood the importance of education, supported his sister's dream just like he supported Klein's university education. After all, Tianjin Technical School was only middle-level education and did not need to go to grammar school or public school for accumulation. In July last year, 15-year-old Melissa passed the entrance examination and became a member of the Steam and Machinery Department of Tianjin Technical School as she wished. The weekly tuition fee also increased to 9 pennies. At the same time, the import and export company where Benson worked was affected by the situation in the South Continent. Both profits and business volume had shrunk significantly. They had to lay off more than 1/3 of the staff. To keep his job and maintain his life, Benson had to accept more heavy tasks, often work overtime, or go on business trips to harsh environments. Just like these days, Klein had thought about helping his brother, but as a commoner, he felt his inadequacy strongly as soon as he entered university. For example, the ancient Fossack language, which is the source language of all countries in the North Continent, is something that children from noble families and wealthy classes have to learn from a young age. While he only came into contact with it when he went to university, there were many similar aspects, and Klein had almost exhausted all his strength, often staying up late and getting up early. To barely catch up with others and graduate smoothly with average grades, memories of his older brother and younger sister jumped in Zhou Mingrui's mind until he turned the handle and the door of the room creaked open. He suddenly woke up and remembered that he was holding a revolver in his hand. This is a semi-controlled item, it will scare the children, and, the wound on my head. Seeing that Melissa was about to come out, Zhou Mingrui hurriedly opened the drawer of the desk, threw the revolver into it, and made a bang. What happened? Melissa heard the noise and looked over in confusion. She was in the most youthful stage. Even if she couldn't eat anything good, her face was thin and slightly pale, but her skin was still glowing and exuding a girl's breath. Seeing her sister's brown eyes looking over inquisitively, Zhou Mingrui tried to remain calm, picked up the object closest to his hand, and then calmly closed the drawer to cover up the existence of the revolver. The touch of his other hand at the temple confirmed that the wound had healed. What he took out of the drawer was a silver pocket watch with a vine leaf pattern. He pressed the top lightly and the cover popped open. It was the most valuable item left by the father of the three siblings, a sergeant of the Royal Navy, but second-hand goods were second-hand goods after all. In recent years, it often ran into problems. Even if it was repaired by a watchmaker, it was the same. This made Benson, who liked to wear it to elevate his status, repeatedly embarrassed and simply left it at home. It had to be said that Melissa might really have a talent for mechanics. After mastering theoretical knowledge, she began to tinker with this pocket watch using the tools of the technical school, and recently she even claimed to have fixed it. Zhou Mingrui watched as the cover popped open and the second hand froze. He instinctively turned the top, intending to wind the pocket watch. However, he twisted it a few times, but there was no sound of the mainspring tightening, and the second hand still did not move. It seems to be broken again, he said to his sister to make conversation. Melissa glanced at him expressionlessly, quickly walked over, and took the pocket watch from him. She stood in place, first pulled up the button on the top of the pocket watch, and after only a few turns, there was a ticking sound of the second hand moving. Normally, pulling it up should be to adjust the time, right? Zhou Mingrui's expression suddenly became blank. Just at this moment, the bell of the distant cathedral came, 6 times in a row, distant and ethereal. Melissa listened and then pulled the button on the top of the pocket watch up a notch, turned it continuously, and adjusted the time. It's fine, she said briefly and emotionlessly, then pressed the top back and returned the pocket watch to Zhou Mingrui. Zhou Mingrui returned a smile awkwardly but politely. Melissa looked deeply at her brother again, turned and walked towards the cupboard, picked up her toothbrush and towel, and left for the public washroom. Her expression just now seemed a bit disdainful and helpless. Is it the look of caring for a geek brother? Zhou Mingrui shook his head and chuckled, snapped the watch cover closed, and then snapped it open again. As he repeated this action, his mind wandered to a question. Without a silencer, Klein's suicide, well, let's consider it suicide for now, would definitely have made a lot of noise. But Melissa, who was separated by a wall, had no idea. Did she sleep too soundly? Or was Klein's suicide itself full of weirdness? Snap, open, snap, close. When Melissa returned from washing, she saw her brother constantly opening and closing the watch cover unconsciously. Her gaze was once again mixed with helplessness, and she said in a sweet voice, Klein, take out all the remaining bread, remember to buy new ones today, and also meat and peas. You have an interview soon, I will make you peas stewed with lamb. As she spoke, she moved the stove out from the corner, lit a fire with the remaining charcoal, and boiled a pot of hot water. Just before the water was about to boil, she opened the bottom drawer of the cupboard, took out a can of inferior tea leaves like a treasure, sprinkled more than a dozen pieces into the pot, and pretended that it was real tea. She poured 2 big cups, one for each of them, and they shared 2 loaves of rye bread with the tea without mixing with chips or too much bran. It still didn't taste good. Zhou Mingrui was weak and hungry. He swallowed the bread with the help of tea, grumbling in his stomach. After a few minutes, Melissa finished eating, gathered her hair that had fallen to her back, and looked at Zhou Mingrui and said, remember to buy new bread, only 8 pounds, the weather is hot, too much will easily spoil, and lamb and peas, remember. Is it really caring for the geek brother? She needs to emphasize it again. Zhou Mingrui nodded with a smile, okay. About the pound in the Lone Kingdom, Zhou Mingrui believed that it was close to the pound he was used to, which was 0.5 kilograms. Based on Klein's memory and his own comparison, Melissa didn't say anything more, got up and tidied up, packed the last loaf of bread for lunch, put on the old sun hat left by her mother, picked up her homemade bag for books and stationery, and prepared to go out. Today is not Sunday. She has to go to school for a whole day. It takes about 50 minutes to walk from this apartment to Tianjin Technical School. There are public horse carriages, 1 penny per kilometer, with a maximum limit of 4 pennies in the city and 6 pennies in the suburbs. To save money, Melissa always leaves early and walks there herself. Just as she opened the door, she paused, half-turned her body and said, Klein, don't buy too much lamb and peas, Benson might not be back until Sunday, remember to buy only 8 pounds of bread. Okay. Zhou Mingrui replied helplessly. At the same time, He repeated the word Sunday in his mind. In the North Continent, a year is also divided into 12 months, with 365 to 366 days a year, and there are 7 days a week. The former is the result of astronomy, which makes Zhou Mingrui suspect that this is a parallel world, and the latter comes from religion. Because there are 7 orthodox gods in the North Continent: the eternal sun, the Lord of storms, the god of knowledge and wisdom, the goddess of the night, the Mother Earth, the god of war, and the god of steam and machinery. Watching his sister close the door and leave, Zhou Mingrui suddenly sighed and quickly turned his thoughts to the ritual of turning his luck. Returning to his seat, Zhou Mingrui didn't rise until the distant church bell tolled 7 times. He ambled over to the cabinet, retrieving his clothes. A black vest, matching suit, slightly tight trousers at the ankles, a semi-high top hat, coupled with a faint scholarly air. When Zhou Mingrui looked at himself in the mirror, he felt as if he was watching a British drama telling stories of the Victorian era. "I'm not going for an interview, just going to buy some groceries, preparing the materials for the transfer ceremony," he muttered to himself and shook his head in amusement. Klein was so concerned about the upcoming interview that it had become an instinct. When he wasn't focusing, he habitually dressed in this only decent suit. Taking a deep breath, Zhou Mingrui removed the suit and vest, replacing them with a worn, brownish-yellow overcoat. His hat was switched to a similarly colored round-brimmed felt one. After tidying himself up, he strolled over to the bunk bed, lifting the upper mattress. He reached into an inconspicuous hole at the bottom, rummaging around until he found the hidden compartment. When his right hand retracted, it held a roll of banknotes, about 7 or 8 sheets, their color a faded dark green. This was Benson's current savings, even including his living expenses for the next 3 days. Only 2 of the notes were 5 solar notes, the rest were all 1 solar notes. In the currency system of Lone Kingdom, the solar was the second tier, originating from ancient silver coins. 1 solar was equal to 12 copper pennies and came in denominations of 1 and 5. At the top of the currency system was the gold pound, also a paper note, but backed by gold and directly pegged to it. 1 gold pound was equal to 20 solars and came in denominations of 1, 5, and 10. Zhou Mingrui unfolded the notes, smelling the faint, special scent of the ink. This was the smell of money. Perhaps it was the influence of Klein's fragmented memories, or perhaps it was his own unchanging desire for money. But at that moment, Zhou Mingrui felt that he had fallen in love with these little pieces of paper. Look, their designs were so exquisite that even the stern and staid King George III with his small mustache looked adorable. Look, the watermark visible in the sunlight was so enticing. The carefully designed anti-counterfeiting label made it distinct from counterfeit money. After admiring them for several tens of seconds, Zhou Mingrui took out 2 1-solar notes, rolled up the rest and stashed them back into the compartment under the mattress, smoothly covering the hole with a strip of cloth. Zhou Mingrui neatly folded the 2 notes he had taken and slipped them into the left pocket of his overcoat, separate from the few pennies in his trouser pocket. After all this, he put the keys in his right pocket, picked up a dark brown paper bag, and quickly walked towards the door. His footsteps slowed down and eventually stopped. Zhou Mingrui stood by the door, his eyebrows furrowed. There were many mysteries surrounding Klein's suicide. Would he encounter any accidents if he just went out like this? After a moment of contemplation, Zhou Mingrui returned to the desk, opened the drawer, and took out the gleaming brass revolver. This was the only self-defense weapon he could think of, and it was a powerful one. Although he had never practiced shooting, just pulling out this gun would surely scare people. Caressing the cold metal cylinder, Zhou Mingrui stuffed the gun into the same pocket as the banknotes. His palm squeezed the notes, his fingers tightly gripping the gun handle, perfectly concealed. A sense of security emerged, and he, who knew a little about everything, suddenly had a worry. Could it accidentally fire? With thoughts swirling, Zhou Mingrui quickly found a solution. He pulled out the gun, swung the cylinder to the left, rotated the empty chamber from the suicide to the firing position, and then snapped it closed. This way, even if it misfired, it would only be a blank round. After restuffing the gun, Zhou Mingrui's left hand stayed in his pocket, never leaving. He adjusted his hat with his right hand, opened the door, and stepped out. The hallway was still dim during the day. The sunlight from the window at the end was very limited. Zhou Mingrui quickly descended the stairs and left the apartment, only then feeling the brightness and warmth. Despite being close to July and the height of summer, Tianjin was located in the north of the Lone Kingdom and had a unique climate. The highest temperature of the year was less than 30 degrees Celsius on Earth, and the morning was even cooler. Some parts of the street were flowing with dirty water, and garbage was strewn about. In Klein's memories, such scenes were not uncommon in areas where the low-income class lived, even if they had sewers, because of the large population and because of life. Come here, delicious pan-fried fish. Hot and fresh oyster soup, have a bowl in the morning and you'll be energetic all day. Fresh fish from the harbor, only 5 pennies each. Small pancakes, eel soup with ginger beer. Sea snails, sea snails, sea snails. Freshly harvested vegetables from the farm outside the city, cheap and fresh. The street vendors selling vegetables, fruits, and cooked foods were shouting loudly, beckoning to the hurried passers-by. Some of them would stop to carefully compare and purchase, while others would wave their hands impatiently because they hadn't secured a job for the day yet. Zhou Mingrui walked through the bustling street, smelling the alternating foul and fragrant odors. His left hand firmly gripped the gun handle, clutching the banknotes. His right hand held onto his round-brimmed hat, slightly bowing his head as he weaved through the crowd. Places with a lot of people always had thieves, especially in this neighborhood with many half-unemployed laborers and starving children pushed around by others. After passing through the dense crowd, Zhou Mingrui straightened his back and raised his head. Looking towards the street corner, there was a wandering accordionist performing there, his melody sometimes melodious, sometimes passionate. Next to him, a group of children, dressed in rags and with a yellowish complexion due to malnutrition, gathered. They listened to the music, following the rhythm, twisting their bodies and dancing their own dances instinctively. Their faces were filled with joy, as if they were little princes or angels. A woman with a numb expression passed by, her skirt dirty, her skin dull, her eyes were dull and blank, only sparkling slightly when she looked at the children, as if seeing herself 30 years ago. Zhou Mingrui passed her, turning onto another street and stopped in front of a Slane bakery. The bakery owner was a 70-year-old grandmother named Wendy Slane. Her hair was completely white, and her face was always filled with a gentle smile. She had been selling bread and pastries here since Klein had memory. Her Tinjin cakes and lemon cakes were delicious. Zhou Mingrui swallowed and said with a smile, "Mrs. Slane, 8 pounds of rye bread." "Oh, little Klein, where's Benson, hasn't he come back yet?" Wendy asked with a smile. "In a few days." Zhou Mingrui gave a vague answer while Wendy was selecting the rye bread. She sighed, "He's such a hard-working young man, he'll have a good wife." As she said this, she smiled mischievously. "Now that you've graduated, our Hoi University history major graduate, you'll soon be able to earn money. You shouldn't be living in an apartment like you are now, you should at least have your own bathroom." "Mrs. Slane, you're like a young and lively lady today." Zhou Mingrui could only respond with a forced laugh. If Klein could successfully pass the interview and become a lecturer at Tinjin University, the whole family would indeed be heading towards affluence. In his fragmented memories, he even fantasized about renting a detached house in the suburbs, with 5 or 6 rooms upstairs, 2 bathrooms, a large balcony, and 2 rooms downstairs, a dining room, a living room, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a basement storage room. This wasn't a luxury. Even during the internship period, a lecturer at Tinjin University could earn 2 gold pounds a week, and after being regularized, it would be 3 gold pounds and 10 solars. You should know that Klein's brother Benson, who had been working for many years, only earned 1 pound and 10 solars a week, and ordinary factory workers earned less than 1 pound or just over. The rent for such a detached house ranged from 19 solars to 1 pound and 18 solars. That's the difference between earning 3 or 4,000 and 14 or 15,000 a month. Zhou Mingrui muttered to himself. However, all of this was predicated on passing the interview at Tinjin University or Backlund University. As for other ways, people without a background couldn't get a recommendation to become a public servant, and those who studied history had a narrow range of employment. There weren't many positions for private consultants for nobles or bankers and industrial tycoons. Considering that the knowledge Klein had became fragments and was incomplete, Zhou Mingrui felt awkward and guilty about Mrs. Slane's expectations. "No, I've always been this young," Wendy humorously replied. While speaking, she packed the 16 well-weighed rye bread into Zhou Mingrui's large deep brown paper bag and spread out her right hand, saying, 9 pennies. Each piece of rye bread weighed about 0.5 pounds, and deviation was inevitable. 9 pennies? Weren't they 11 pennies a few days ago? Zhou Mingrui asked subconsciously. The price was even 15 pennies 2 months ago. You should thank the repeal of the Corn Law, thank those who marched. Wendy spread out her hands and laughed. Zhou Mingrui nodded with a vague understanding. Klein's memory of it was fragmented. He only remembered that the core of the Corn Law was to protect the price of domestic agricultural products. Until the price rose to a certain level, they would not import grains from southern countries like Fenebot, Massey, and Lundberg. Why would people protest against it? Without much ado, for fear of revealing his revolver, Zhou Mingrui carefully took out a banknote and handed it to Mrs. Slint. After retrieving 3 copper pennies and stuffing them into his pocket, he picked up the paper bag with the bread and headed for the lettuce and meat market across the street, working hard for the tender pea stewed lamb that his sister had asked for. At the intersection of Iron Cross Street and Daffodil Street, there was a municipal square where a lot of tents had been set up, and clowns in bizarre costumes were distributing flyers everywhere. "A circus show tomorrow night?" Zhou Mingrui glanced at the flyer in someone's hand and murmured the content. Melissa would definitely like it. "How do they charge for tickets?" With a flash of thought, Zhou Mingrui moved closer. Just as he was about to ask one of the clowns in red and yellow, a hoarse female voice suddenly came from his side. "Do you want to have your fortune told?" Subconsciously turning his head to look, Zhou Mingrui saw a woman standing in front of a low tent, wearing a pointed hat and a long black dress. Her face was painted with red and yellow paint, and her eyes were deep and gray-blue. "No," Zhou Mingrui shook his head. He didn't have the spare money for fortune-telling. The woman smiled and said, "My tarot predictions are very accurate." "Tarot?" Zhou Mingrui was suddenly stunned. This pronunciation was very similar to the tarot cards on Earth, and the tarot cards on Earth were a kind of fortune-telling poker, just with additional, graphic cards, with symbolic symbols. Wait, he suddenly remembered the origin of tarot divination in this world. It did not originate from the 7 orthodox deities, nor was it a legacy of ancient times, but was invented more than 170 years ago by Roselle Gustave, the then governor of the Intis Republic. Mr. Roselle invented the steam engine, improved the sailboat, overthrew the rule of the Intis kingdom, and was recognized by the Church of the God of Craftsmanship, becoming the first governor of the new republic. Later, he fought in the south and the north, incorporated Lundberg and other countries into protection, made strong northern continent countries such as the Rune Kingdom, Phenabot, and the Phazak Empire bow their heads one after another, and then turned the republic back into an empire. Proclaiming himself Caesar the Great during Roselle's rule, the Church of the God of Craftsmanship received the first public oracle since the 5th epoch, changing the title of the God of Craftsmanship to the God of Steam and Machinery. Roselle also invented tarot divination and established the current composition and gameplay of playing cards. There were several types that Zhou Mingrui was familiar with, such as upgrades, fighting landlords, Texas, Kunta. In addition, he sent fleets to find the sea route to the southern continent in storms and turbulence, marking the beginning of the colonial era. Unfortunately, he was betrayed in his old age and was assassinated in 1198 of the 5th epoch by the Eternal Sun Church, the original Intis royal family, Sorin family, and other nobles. He fell in the White Maple Palace. Remembering these common senses, Zhou Mingrui suddenly felt a toothache. Could this be a predecessor who has traveled through time? With this thought in mind, Zhou Mingrui was interested in seeing what the tarot cards here looked like. So he nodded to the woman with the pointed hat and painted face and said, "If it's, reasonably priced, I'll give it a try." The woman immediately smiled and said, "Sir, you're the first person to come for a fortune today. It's free." Free? Free things are the most expensive. Zhou Mingrui muttered silently, planning to firmly refuse any additional services no matter what they were. "If you're so capable, predict that I'm a time traveler." With this thought, Zhou Mingrui followed the woman with red and yellow paint on her face, bent down and entered the low tent. The tent was very dark, with only a hint of light seeping in, vaguely illuminating a table full of tarot cards. The woman in the pointed hat was unaffected, her black dress flowing like water as she moved around the table and sat down, lighting a candle. The dim, flickering light added an air of mystery to the tent. Zhou Mingrui sat down without showing any emotion, his eyes scanning the tarot cards on the table. He recognized familiar major arcana such as the Magician, Emperor, Hanged Man, and Temperance. Could Comrade Roselle really be a predecessor? I wonder if he's from my gluttonous empire. Zhou Mingrui's lips twitched slightly in a trance. Before he could finish examining the turned-over cards on the table, the woman who claimed to be a fortune teller had already gathered all the tarot cards together, stacked them into a pile, and pushed them in front of him. "You shuffle the cards and cut the deck," the circus fortune teller said in a low, husky voice. "Me shuffle?" Zhou Mingrui reflexively asked. The fortune teller's face moved under the red and yellow paint, revealing a faint smile. "Of course. Only you can predict your own fate. I am just an interpreter." Zhou Mingrui immediately questioned her warily. "Interpreting doesn't cost extra, does it?" "As a keyboard folklorist, I've seen plenty of these tricks." The fortune teller was visibly taken aback, and after a moment, she mumbled, "It's free." Zhou Mingrui relaxed, pushing his revolver a little further into his pocket before calmly reaching out to shuffle and cut the deck. "Okay." He placed the shuffled tarot cards in the middle of the table. The fortune teller clasped her hands together and studied the cards for a moment before suddenly asking, "Sorry, I forgot to ask, what do you want to predict?" Back when he was chasing after his first love, Zhou Mingrui had studied tarot cards and answered without hesitation: the past, the present, and the future. This is a type of tarot spread where 3 cards are laid out in sequence, symbolizing the past, present, and future. The fortune teller nodded, then smiled and said, "Then please shuffle the cards again, understand what you want to ask, and only then can you shuffle out cards that truly have symbolic meaning." "You were just messing with me. You're so petty. Is it because I keep emphasizing that it's free?" Zhou Mingrui's facial muscles twitched. He took a deep breath, took back the tarot cards, and shuffled and cut the deck again. "There's no problem this time, right?" He placed the cut deck on the table. "No more." The fortune teller extended her finger, took a card from the top of the deck, and placed it on Zhou Mingrui's left. "This card symbolizes the past. This card symbolizes the present." The fortune teller placed the second card in front of Zhou Mingrui. She then took the third card and placed it on Zhou Mingrui's right. "This card symbolizes the future. Now, which card would you like to see first?" After doing all this, the fortune teller lifted her head and looked deeply into Zhou Mingrui's eyes. "Let's start with the present." Zhou Mingrui decided after a moment's thought. The fortune teller slowly nodded and turned over the card in front of her. The card depicted a young man in fancy clothes with a dazzling headdress, carrying a staff with a bag on it, a small dog pulling at his feet, and the number 0. "The Fool." The fortune teller softly read out the name of the card, her gray-blue eyes fixed on Zhou Mingrui the Fool. The 0 card in the tarot deck? The beginning? A beginning that contains all possibilities? Zhou Mingrui, who was not even a novice tarot enthusiast, made a rough interpretation based on his impressions. Just as the fortune teller was about to speak, the cloth door of the tent was suddenly lifted, and the strong sunlight shone in, making Zhou Mingrui, who was sitting with his back to the door, instinctively squint. How dare you impersonate me again? Fortune-telling is my job. A woman's voice growled angrily, get back. Remember, you're just an animal trainer. Animal trainer? Zhou Mingrui adjusted to the light and saw a woman at the entrance who was wearing a pointed hat, a black dress, and red and yellow face paint, but she was taller and thinner. The woman sitting in front of him quickly stood up and said sulkily, don't mind, I just like this. I have to say, sometimes my predictions and interpretations are quite accurate, really. As she spoke, she lifted her skirt and quickly left the tent. Sir, do you need me to interpret for you? The real fortune teller looked at Zhou Mingrui and asked with a smile. Zhou Mingrui twitched his mouth and asked sincerely, is it free? No. The real fortune teller replied. Then forget it. Zhou Mingrui put his hand back in his pocket, holding the revolver and banknote, bent down and left the tent. This is ridiculous, they even got an animal trainer to do tarot readings. Isn't a good animal trainer one who doesn't want to be a fortune teller? Zhou Mingrui quickly put the matter out of his mind, spent 7 pennies on a pound of not-so-good lamb at the lettuce and meat market, bought some peas, cabbage, onions, potatoes and other items, plus the bread he had bought before. He had spent a total of 25 copper pennies, or 2 souls and 1 penny. Money really doesn't last, poor Benson. Not only had Zhou Mingrui spent the 2 banknotes he had brought out, he had even spent the penny he had originally in his pocket. That he made this casual remark and didn't think much of it. Rushing back home, now that he had the main ingredients, he could start the luck-changing ritual. When the tenants on the second floor had all left, Zhou Mingrui didn't rush to start the ritual. Instead, he first translated the words Fuxing Xianhuang Immortal Zun into ancient Fushak and Rune, planning to try again in the local language the next day if the original spell didn't work. After all, he had to consider the differences between the 2 worlds and the issue of adapting to local customs. As for translating into Hermes, the ancient language used for prayers and sacrifices, Zhou Mingrui couldn't do it because he didn't have enough vocabulary. After doing all this, he pulled out 4 loaves of rye bread from the paper bag. He placed one in the corner where the coal stove used to be, one on the inside bottom of the dressing mirror, one on the top of the cupboard where the 2 walls met, and one in the place on the right side of the desk where miscellaneous items were stacked. Taking a deep breath, Zhou Mingrui stood in the center of the room, calmed down for a few minutes, and then solemnly started walking in a square, counter-clockwise. As he took the first step, he murmured Fuxing Xianhuang Immortal Zun. With the second step, he sincerely recited Fuxing Xianhuang Heavenly Monarch. With the third step, Zhou Mingrui held his breath and whispered Fuxing Xianhuang God. With the fourth step, he exhaled and recited with all his heart Fuxing Xianhuang Heavenly Zun. After completing the circle, Zhou Mingrui closed his eyes and waited for the result. He was filled with anticipation, unease, hope, and fear. Can I go back? Will it work? Will there be any unexpected situations? The darkness in front of him was tinged with the deep red of light. Zhou Mingrui's mind was filled with thoughts that were hard to calm. Just then, he suddenly felt as if the air around him had stopped moving and had become viscous and strange. Then, he heard a whisper in his ear, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp, sometimes ethereal, sometimes seductive, sometimes manic, sometimes frenzied. Even though he couldn't understand what the whispers were saying, Zhou Mingrui couldn't help but listen and try to discern. His head throbbed again, the pain fierce as if a steel spike had been driven into it. Zhou Mingrui felt as if his head was about to burst, his thoughts tinted with hallucinatory hues. He knew something was wrong and struggled to open his eyes, but he simply couldn't execute this simple action. His entire being grew increasingly tense, on the verge of breaking, and Zhou Mingrui found himself entertaining a self-deprecating thought. Not seeking death won't end in death. He couldn't bear it anymore. Just as the string in his mind was about to snap, the cacophony of overlapping whispers receded, and his surroundings became incredibly quiet, the atmosphere ethereal. Not just the atmosphere, Zhou Mingrui felt his own body was equally ethereal. He tried to open his eyes again, this time with ease. A pervasive gray fog met his gaze, hazy, blurry, and boundless. What's going on? Zhou Mingrui looked around in surprise, then lowered his gaze to discover he was hovering on the edge of an immense gray fog. The gray fog flowed like water, studded with deep red stars. Some were large, some small, some hidden deep within, some floating on the surface. Looking at this holographic-like scene, Zhou Mingrui extended his right hand, half in confusion and half in exploration, trying to touch a deep red star floating on the surface to his right, looking for a way out. As his finger barely grazed the surface of the star, ripples suddenly surged from his body, triggering an explosion of deep red. Like a dreamy firework, Zhou Mingrui was startled, hastily withdrawing. His right hand, accidentally bumping into another deep red dot. So, this star also shone brightly, and so, Zhou Mingrui felt his mind go blank, his spirit dissipating. In the capital of the Rune Kingdom, Beckland, in the Queen's district, inside a luxurious villa, Audrey Hall sat at her dressing table, caressing an ancient, cracked bronze mirror with an old-fashioned pattern on the table. Magic mirror, awaken quickly, I command you to wake up in the name of the Hall family. She tried one plea after another, but the mirror remained unresponsive. After about 10 minutes, she finally chose to give up, pouted her lips in grievance, and muttered softly, Dad was lying to me after all. He always told me this mirror was a treasure of the ancient Solomon Empire's Black Emperor, an extraordinary item. Before her words fell, the bronze mirror on the table suddenly burst into a deep red glow. Enveloping her, on the Sunia Sea, an outdated three-masted sailing ship was navigating through a storm. Algernon Wilson stood on the deck, his body rising and falling with the ship's rocking, easily maintaining his balance. He wore a robe embroidered with lightning patterns, holding a strange glass bottle in his hand. Bubbles rolled inside from time to time, frost gathered into snow, and traces of wind blew. I still need the blood of a ghost shark. Algernon muttered. At that moment, the glass bottle and his palm exploded in deep red, instantly engulfing the surroundings. Above a grey fog, Audrey Hall regained her vision. She looked around in terror and confusion, noticing the man with a blurry head and vague figure making almost the same movements. Immediately after, they both noticed a mysterious figure shrouded in grey mist standing not far away. Mysterious man. Zhou Mingrui was equally flabbergasted. Sir, where is this? What do you want to do? Audrey and Algernon paused, fell silent, and then almost simultaneously spoke. In the same ruin language, the same solemn and tense feeling. Where is this? What do I want to do? I want to know too. Zhou Mingrui calmed down, silently repeating the questions of the two. What impressed him the most was not the sentences composed of words, the meaning contained in the sentences, but the panic, vigilance, fear, and awe shown by the man and woman, unknowingly pulling two people into this foggy world, even as the culprit himself was also extremely shocked and stunned, let alone the passive party. In their view, such a thing and encounter must have exceeded their imagination, right, at this moment. Zhou Mingrui thought of two choices. One was to pretend to be a victim himself, hide his true identity, in exchange for a certain degree of trust, watch the changes, fish in troubled waters, and the other was to maintain the mysterious image in the eyes of the man and woman. Actively guide the development of things, and obtain valuable information from it. Without time to think and deliberate, Zhou Mingrui seized the fleeting idea in his mind, quickly made a decision, and tried the second method, take advantage of the other party's current psychological state and grasp their own biggest advantage. After a few seconds of silence above the grey mist, Zhou Mingrui chuckled lightly, his tone calm, his voice low but not deep, as if responding to the visitor's polite greeting. A trial. A trial, a trial? Audrey Hall looked at the mysterious man shrouded in grey mist, feeling absurd, funny, thrilling, and weird. She was just in her bedroom, in front of the dressing table, and turned her head to come to this place full of grey mist. How incredible. Audrey took a breath, showing an impeccable polite smile, and asked a little nervously, Sir, is the trial over? Can we go back? Alger Wilson also wanted to make a similar temptation, but he was more stable with rich experience and suppressed his impulse, just silently watching. Zhou Mingrui looked at the questioner, and could vaguely see the other's figure through the blur, which was a tall girl with soft golden hair, but the specific appearance was not clear. He didn't rush to answer the girl's question, turned his head and looked at the man on the other side again. The other party had dark blue hair, like seaweed, and his body was medium, not strong. At this moment, Zhou Mingrui suddenly had a realization. When he became stronger, or understood this grey mist world more deeply, maybe he could really see through the blur and see the girl and man's looks clearly. I end this incident, they are guests, and I am the host. With a change of mentality, Zhou Mingrui immediately sensed some details that he had not noticed just now. The sweet-voiced girl and the calm and introverted man are both quite illusory, dyed slightly red, just like the projection of the two deep red stars on the grey mist. And this projection is based on the connection between oneself and the deep red, an invisible but tangible connection that oneself can truly grasp. Cut off this connection, the projection will dissipate, and they can return. Zhou Mingrui nodded imperceptibly, looked at the blonde girl, and chuckled softly. Of course, if you formally propose, I can let you go now. Hearing the harmless Audrey breathed a sigh of relief, believing that the gentleman who could do such magical things would definitely keep his promise once he gave it. With a slight calm in spirit, she didn't rush to leave, and her azure eyes turned left and right, flashing an unusual light. She was nervous, expectant, and eager to try. This is a wonderful experience. Well, I have always been looking forward to something like this. I mean, I like mystery, I like miracles beyond nature. No, my point, sir, how can I become extraordinary? The more she said, the more excited she became, and even got a little bit incoherent. The dream that sprouted when she heard various strange stories from her elders when she was a child seemed to finally see the dawn of realization. In just a few words, she has forgotten her previous fears and fears. Good question. I want to know the answer too. Zhou Mingrui said to himself. He began to think about how to answer to maintain a mysterious image. At the same time, he felt that standing and talking like this seemed a bit low. Shouldn't such a scene have a temple, a long table, and many backrest chairs carved with ancient patterns and full of mystery? And he sat at the top and quietly watched the guests. As soon as Zhou Mingrui's thought fell, the grey mist suddenly rolled up, frightening Audrey and Alger. In an instant, they saw towering stone pillars around them, and saw that the top was covered by a wide dome. The entire building is magnificent, grand, and towering, like the palace of giants in legends. Under the dome, where the grey mist gathers, there is an extra bronze long table, with 10 high-backed chairs on the left and right, and the same seats are placed in front and back. On the back of the chair, it is dazzling and deep red. It outlines strange constellations that do not correspond to reality. Audrey and Alger were just sitting opposite each other, in the position closest to the top. The girl looked to the left, then to the right, and couldn't help muttering, "It's really magical, indeed magical." Zhou Mingrui reached out with his right hand, rubbed the edge of the bronze long table with a very small range, and kept his face unchanged. Alger also looked around, and after a few seconds of silence, he suddenly spoke, answering Audrey's question on behalf of Zhou Mingrui. "You are a ruin, right? If you want to become extraordinary, join the Church of the Night Goddess, the Church of the Storm Lord, or the Church of Steam and Machinery." Although most people can't see the extraordinary in their lives, so they doubt that the church is the same, and even within the major churches, many clergy have similar ideas, but I can tell you clearly that in the arbitration court, in the execution agency, the extraordinary still exists, and is still fighting against the dangers growing in the dark, but the number is much less compared to the early Black Iron era or before. Zhou Mingrui listened attentively, but his body movements tried to show an indifferent attitude when listening to children's stories. Relying on the historical knowledge left by Klein, he knew that the Black Iron Age refers to the current era, that is, the Fifth Era, which began 1,349 years ago. Audrey listened quietly, took a breath, and said, "Sir, I know all you said, even more, like Night Watcher, like Punisher, like the Heart of Machinery, but I don't want to lose my freedom." Alger chuckled lightly and ambiguously said, "Who can become extraordinary without wanting to pay the price? If you don't consider joining the church and accepting the test, then you can only find the royal family, find those nobles with a family history of over 1,000 years, or rely on luck to find those hidden evil organization." Audrey subconsciously puffed up her cheeks, and then looked around anxiously, waiting to confirm that the mysterious gentleman and the guy opposite did not notice her small movements, then asked, "Is there no other way?" Algernon fell silent. After a dozen or so breaths, he turned his head to look at the quietly observing a mysterious gentleman. Zhou Mingrui, seeing that the latter remained non-committal, he turned back to Audrey, and carefully said, "I actually have 2 Sequence 9 potion formulas at hand." Sequence 9. Zhou Mingrui mused to himself. "Really? Which 2? Audrey clearly understood what a Sequence 9 potion formula represented. Algernon leaned back slightly and answered at a leisurely pace, "As you know, humans can only become true beyonders by relying on potions. The names of these potions come from the blasphemous tablets and have undergone numerous translations through Giant, Elf, Ancient Hermes, Ancient Fushak, and modern Hermes languages. They have evolved to reflect the characteristics of different eras. The name is not the key, but whether it can represent the core symbol of the potion. The Sequence 9 formulas I have include one called Sailor. It can grant you an exceptional sense of balance, allowing you to move freely even on a ship engulfed by a storm, as if you were on solid ground. You also gain remarkable strength and illusory scales beneath your skin, making you as slippery as a fish and as agile in water as a sea creature. You could easily dive for at least 10 minutes without any equipment." "That sounds amazing. Sea adherent of the Storm Lord?" Audrey asked half expectantly, half confirmingly. "In ancient times, it was indeed called sea adherent," Algernon continued without pause. "The second Sequence 9 formula is called Spectator. I'm not sure what it was referred to in ancient times. This potion can grant you a superior mind and sharp observational skills. I believe you've seen operas and plays, so you can understand what spectator represents. Like a bystander, you can scrutinize the actors in the mundane world, deducing their true intentions from their expressions, their behavior, their words, and their unknown actions." At this point, Algernon emphasized, "You must remember, whether at a lavish banquet or a bustling street, a spectator is always just a spectator." Audrey's eyes lit up as she listened, and it took her a while to say, "Why?" "Well, that's a question for later. I think I like this feeling, spectator. How can I get that spectator formula? What can I exchange with you?" Algernon, as if prepared, answered solemnly, "Blood of the ghost shark, at least 100 milliliters of it." Audrey first nodded excitedly, then asked worriedly, "If I can get it, how do I give it to you? And how can I be sure that you will give me the potion formula after you get the ghost shark blood, and that the formula is genuine?" Algernon replied casually, "I will give you an address. Once I receive the ghost shark blood, I will mail you the formula or directly tell you here. As for the guarantee, I believe if we have the testimony of this mysterious gentleman, both you and I would be reassured. As he said this, he turned his gaze to the seated Zhou Mingrui. Sir, you brought us here and possess unimaginable power. Your testimony is something neither I nor she would dare to disobey. Right. Audrey's eyes lit up, excitedly agreeing that in her opinion, the mysterious gentleman with unimaginable means was indeed a sufficiently authoritative witness. Neither she nor the guy across from her would dare to deceive him. Audrey half turned her body, sincerely looking at Zhou Mingrui. Sir, please be the witness to our transaction. At this point, she realized that she had forgotten to ask a certain question all along, which was very impolite, so she quickly asked, Sir, how should we address you? Algernon nodded slightly and asked solemnly, Sir, how should we address you? Zhou Mingrui was taken aback for a moment. The fingers resting on the bronze table began to tap lightly, and the content of his previous divination flashed through his mind. He leaned back, withdrew his right hand, and crossed his fingers under his chin. With a smile, he looked at the two and said, You can call me, here. He paused, then began in a gentle and casual tone, Fool. You may call me, the Fool. The brief response quickly faded into the grandeur of the temple and the pervading mist, but the voice echoed for a long time in Audrey and Alger's hearts, creating waves of ripples. An unexpected yet fitting title that perfectly embodied the image of mystery, power, and peculiarity. After a few seconds of silence, Audrey stood up, lifting her skirt slightly and bending her knees. She curtsied to Zhou Mingrui. Respected Mr. Fool, may I presume to request your permission to bear witness to our transaction? A trivial matter, Zhou Mingrui responded swiftly in a manner befitting his persona. It is our honor, Mr. Fool. Alger also rose, placed his right hand on his chest, and bowed. Zhou Mingrui gestured with his right hand and spoke with a smile. You may proceed. Alger nodded, sat down again, and turned to Audrey. If you can get the ghost shark blood, have it sent to the Warrior and Sea Bar on Pelican Street in the White Rose district of Pritz Harbor. Tell the owner, Williams, that it's what the captain wants. After I confirm it, will you send me the potion formula to the address or just tell me directly? Audrey pondered for a moment, then smiled. I choose the more secretive way, right here, although it's quite a test of my memory. Since Mr. Fool agreed to witness the transaction, it meant that similar gatherings would happen in the future. Thinking this, she suddenly turned her head, her eyes twinkling as she looked at Zhou Mingrui and proposed enthusiastically, Mr. Fool, would you mind having more attempts like this? Alger, having listened attentively, was also moved and quickly echoed, Mr. Fool, don't you find these gatherings interesting? Although your power is beyond our imagination, there are always fields in the world that you are not familiar with or good at. The lady across the table is clearly of noble birth, and I have my own unique experiences, insights, channels, and resources. Perhaps we can help you accomplish trivial things that are inconvenient for you to do yourself at some future time. From his perspective, since he was pulled in here without any resistance or defenses, it meant that the power was in the hands of the mysterious Mr. Fool. It didn't necessarily mean that if he wanted to refuse or not participate in the gathering again, he could succeed. So, it's better to dig deeper into the benefits of this encounter, to offset the disadvantages with gains. The three parties at the long table have different backgrounds, resources, information channels, and understandings of the mysterious realm. If they could exchange and cooperate to a limited extent, it would produce wonderful effects that could not be estimated or measured. For example, the resource exchange just agreed upon, or if he wanted to kill someone, he could ask the party members, who have no apparent or substantial connection with him to help, which would perfectly mislead the matter in another direction. A lady of noble birth. Is my performance and accent so obvious? Audrey's mouth half opened, and she was taken aback for a moment. But she quickly recovered and nodded without hesitation, Mr. Fool, I think this is a great suggestion. As long as the gatherings become regular, if there are things you are not convenient to handle, you can totally turn to us, of course, within our capabilities. From the beginning, Zhou Mingrui was weighing the pros and cons. More gatherings would indeed allow him to gain more extraordinary secrets and mystical knowledge, which would help him to go back in the future. For example, the potion formula of the audience that should appear at the next gathering. Similarly, he could also obtain information and get some help for his current real life. However, the more gatherings, the easier it is to expose his true colors. Sure enough, no matter which world, there are no things that only have benefits. Zhou Mingrui stretched out his right hand again, tapping the edge of the long table with his fingers. Considering that the convening and dismissal of the gathering are under his control, even if some problems are exposed, they are within controllable range. The benefits obviously outweigh the disadvantages. Zhou Mingrui quickly made a decision. He stopped tapping, met four pairs of hopeful and anxious eyes, and smiled. I am a person who likes equivalent exchange. I won't ask you to help unconditionally. Every Monday, at 3 in the afternoon, try to be alone. Wait for me to try a few more times, figure out some things, maybe you can ask for leave in advance, so you don't have to worry about being in an inappropriate place. This is equivalent to agreeing to Alger and Audrey's proposal. Audrey, who just turned 17 and has always been pampered, is very girlish. Hearing Mr. Fool's answer, she couldn't help but clench her fists and swing them lightly in front of her chest. Should we also give ourselves a title? After all, we can't communicate with our real names. Before Alger could speak, she said with sparkling eyes and full of enthusiasm, even if Mr. Fool might not be deceived by my real situation, that guy across the table is a bit dangerous, can't let him know who I am. Good idea, Zhou Mingrui responded briefly and casually. Audrey immediately began to think, while speaking, since you are Mr. Fool, from the tarot cards, as a regular, long-term, and secret gathering, the titles should be consistent as much as possible. I'll also pick from the tarot cards. Her tone gradually became cheerful. I've decided, my title is, Justice. This is one of the 22 major arcana of the tarot. And sir, what about you? Audrey looked at her companion across the table with a smile. Alger frowned slightly, and then relaxed. The Hanged Man. This is another major arcana. Okay, then we can consider ourselves the founding members of the tarot club. Audrey blurted out happily, then looked at Zhou Mingrui, who was shrouded in grey mist, with some nervousness. No problem, right, Mr. Fool? Zhou Mingrui shook his head with a smile. For such small matters, you can decide for yourselves. Thank you. Audrey was clearly very excited. Then, she turned to Alger. Mr. Hanged Man, can you repeat the address just now? I'm afraid my memory isn't deep enough. No problem. Alger was quite satisfied with Audrey's seriousness and repeated the address again. After repeating it 3 times, Audrey, full of enthusiasm, said again, I heard that the tarot cards were actually a game invented by Emperor Roselle and didn't have the function of divination. No, many times, divination comes from oneself. Everyone has spirituality and can resonate with the spiritual world and the higher-level information related to oneself. It's just that ordinary people can't perceive this and even less interpret the hints they get. When they use divination tools, these messages will be presented through the tools. A simple example is dreams and dream interpretation. Alger looked at Zhou Mingrui. Seeing him make no comment, he refuted Audrey's statement. Tarot cards are actually such tools. They use more symbols and more reasonable elements to help us interpret hints more conveniently and accurately. Zhou Mingrui seemed careless, but he listened very carefully. However, the phenomenon of his spirit being empty began to worsen, and his head throbbed. I see. Audrey nodded in agreement, then emphasized, I don't mean this, I'm not questioning the tarot cards. I heard that Emperor Roselle actually made another deck of cards, a secret one, symbolizing some unknown powers. There are 22 cards in total. After it was completed, he referred to this and invented the 22 major arcana of the tarot as game tools. Is this statement accurate? She looked at Zhou Mingrui, seemingly seeking answers from the mysterious Mr. Fool. Zhou Mingrui only smiled, not uttering a word, casting his gaze towards the Hanged Man, with an air of testing her. Algernon unconsciously straightened his back and said solemnly, yes, it is said that Emperor Roselle had seen the blasphemous stone tablet, and that deck of cards hides the secrets of the 22 divine pathways. 22 divine pathways. Audrey repeated with a tone full of longing. At this moment, Zhou Mingrui's headache intensified, feeling his invisible connection with the Crimson Star and the grey mist starting to waver. All right, let's end today's gathering here. He immediately decided, speaking in a deep voice. As you will. Algernon bowed his head in salute. As you will. Audrey echoed, the Hanged Man. She had many questions and thoughts, completely reluctant to end the gathering. As Zhou Mingrui cut the connection, he chuckled and said, let's look forward to our next gathering. As that star brightened again, the deep red light receded like water. Audrey and Algernon heard Mr. Fool's words, their figures becoming more blurred, increasingly ethereal. In less than a second, the projection shattered, and silence returned above the grey mist. Zhou Mingrui felt his body rapidly becoming heavy, his surroundings becoming elusive. His vision darkened, and then the brilliant sunlight returned. He was still in his apartment, still standing in the center. It's like a dream. What on earth is that world of grey mist? Who or what power created the change just now? Zhou Mingrui whispered in awe, full of confusion, his legs feeling as if they were filled with lead as he walked towards the desk. He picked up the pocket watch he had left outside earlier, checking how much time had passed. 1-to-1 time flow speed. Zhou Mingrui roughly judged, putting down the pocket watch, his head throbbing with pain. He could no longer support himself and sat down on the chair, bowing his head, and began to massage his temples with his left thumb and middle finger. After a while, he sighed and said in Chinese, it seems I won't be able to go back for a while. Only the ignorant can be fearless, having witnessed such magical events. Understanding the extraordinary and mysterious world, Zhou Mingrui dared not recklessly attempt the Gufusak language and rune language luck ritual. Who knows what other situations might occur, perhaps even more bizarre, more terrifying, or even worse than death. At least I need to have a deep understanding of mysticism before I can try. Zhou Mingrui thought helplessly. Fortunately, the so-called gathering could provide him with help. After another silence, he spoke to himself with a mix of frustration, disappointment, pain, and melancholy. From now on, I am Klein. Klein tried to shift his thoughts back to methods and plans to ease his negative emotions. Perhaps next week he could eavesdrop on the formula for the audience potion. That gathering just now was really amazing, bringing people from different parts of the world together, face to face, sharing knowledge. This sounds a bit familiar. Klein paused for a few seconds, suddenly laughed, and while massaging his temples, he mockingly whispered, "How about trying an online social platform?" The wind howled and the rain poured down. The three-masted ship tossed and turned among the towering waves, like a toy tossed and caught by a giant, caught and tossed again. Alger Wilson's deep red eyes faded. He found himself still standing on the deck, no different from before. Immediately after, he saw the strangely shaped glass bottle in his hand shatter. Frost turned into water, blending into the raindrops. In just 2 or 3 seconds, this ancient artifact had completely lost any trace of its existence. A hexagonal, crystal-clear snowflake appeared in Alger's palm, then quickly faded until it disappeared, seemingly shrinking into his flesh. Alger nodded almost imperceptibly as if pondering something, and remained silent for a full 5 minutes. He turned and walked towards the cabin entrance. Just about to go in, he met a man in a robe embroidered with lightning patterns coming out. The man with soft blonde hair stopped in his tracks, looked at Alger, extended his right hand, clenched his fist and placed it on his chest, saying, "May the storm be with you. May the storm be with you." Alger's rugged, profound face showed no superfluous emotions, and he also clenched his right fist and pounded his left chest. After saluting each other, Alger entered the cabin, walking down the corridor towards the captain's room at the far end. Along the way, he did not encounter any sailors or crew members. The place was as quiet as the inside of a tomb. The door to the captain's room opened, revealing a soft, thick, dark brown carpet. On either side were bookshelves and wine cabinets. The slightly yellowed books and dark red bottles of wine shimmered under the glow of the candlelight. The desk holding the candle had a bottle of ink, a quill, a black metal telescope, and a brass sextant. Behind the desk, a middle-aged man with a pale face, wearing a skull captain's hat, watched as Alger walked over, gritting his teeth in anger and said, "I will not surrender. I believe you can do it." Alger calmly responded, as if commenting on the poor weather of the day. "You?" The middle-aged man was taken aback, seemingly unprepared for such a response. Just then, Alger slightly bent his body, suddenly lunging forward, instantly closing the distance between them to just the length of the desk. Bang! He tensed his shoulder, his right hand shot out, gripping the middle-aged man's throat, not giving the other party a chance to react. His back of the hand showed illusory fish scales, and his fingers exerted force like mad. Crack! With a crisp sound, the middle-aged man's eyes widened in shock. His body was lifted off the ground, his legs twitched violently, but quickly regained calm. His eyes were lost, his pupils began to dilate, and his crotch gradually became wet, emitting a foul smell. Alger lifted the middle-aged man, bent his back, and took a step forward, approaching the wall. Bang! He used the middle-aged man as a shield and slammed it against the wall, his arm as thick and monstrous as a beast. The wooden wall shattered on impact, and the violent wind and rain carrying the smell of the sea swept in. Alger twisted his waist and threw the middle-aged man out of the cabin and into the towering waves. The sky was dark, the wind and rain howled, and the power of nature buried everything. Alger pulled out a white handkerchief and carefully wiped his right palm, then threw it into the sea as well. He took a few steps back and patiently waited for his companions to come in. What happened? In less than 10 seconds, the soft blonde-haired man from earlier rushed in. The captain escaped. Alger panted and replied regretfully, he still had some extraordinary power left. Damn it! The blonde man cursed under his breath. He walked to the broken mouth and gazed into the distance, but apart from the wind, rain, and waves, he saw nothing. Forget it, he's just a bonus. The blonde man waved his arm, finding this ghost ship from the Tudor era, we will only be credited. Even as a favored one of the sea, he dared not dive into the water in such weather. And if the storm continues, the captain won't last long either. Alger nodded, noticing that the hole in the wooden wall began to heal at a visible rate. He took a deep look, subconsciously turned his head, and looked towards the position of the ship's helm and sails. Even through the wooden planks, he could clearly know the situation there. No first mate, no second mate, no sailors, not even a living person. It was empty. The helm and sails were mysteriously adjusting themselves. In his mind, the image of the fool shrouded in grey mist appeared again, and Alger suddenly sighed. He turned his head to look at the raging waves outside, and said in a dreamy voice full of both anticipation and fear, a new era has begun. In the capital of the Rune Kingdom, Beckland, the Queen's area. Audrey Hall pinched her cheek, unable to believe what she had just experienced. In front of her dressing table, the ancient copper mirror was shattered. Looking down, Audrey saw a deep red flow on the back of her hand, like a star tattoo. That deep red gradually dimmed and eventually disappeared into the skin. Only then did Audrey confirm that she was not dreaming. She blinked her eyes, the corners of her mouth slowly curled up. She couldn't help but stand up, bending over to pick up her skirt. She curtsied to the air. Audrey's steps were light, her body turned, and she began to dance the most popular ancient elf dance in the court. Her figure was graceful, her face full of radiant smiles. Knock knock knock. The door to the bedroom was suddenly knocked. Who is it? Audrey stopped abruptly, adjusting herself into an elegant posture. "Miss, may I come in? It's time for you to get ready." The personal maid asked from outside the door. Audrey turned her head to look at the mirror on the dressing table, quickly put away her smile, leaving only a faint one that she looked left and right, confirming that there were no problems with her image before she gently opened her mouth. "Come in." The doorknob turned, her personal maid, Annie, pushed the door and entered. "Oh, it's broken." Annie immediately noticed the fate of the old copper mirror. Audrey blinked her eyes and spoke slowly. Yes, Susie came in earlier, you know, she always likes to destroy things." Susie was a golden retriever with not so pure blood, a gift from her father, Count Hall, when he bought a foxhound. But Audrey loved her very much. "You need to discipline her well." Annie tidied up the pieces of the copper mirror, fearing that the young lady would be injured. After all this, she looked at Audrey and asked with a smile, "Which dress do you want to wear?" Audrey thought for a moment and said, "I like the one designed by Mrs. Jinnia for my 17th birthday." "No, people will say that the Hall family is in a financial crisis, and you're wearing the same dress for the second time at a formal occasion." Annie denied, shaking her head. "But I really like it," Audrey emphasized in a gentle tone. "You can wear it at home, or on less formal occasions." Annie showed an attitude that there was no room for negotiation on this matter. "Then let's go with the one that Mr. Sides sent over the day before yesterday, the one with the ruffled cuffs." Audrey inhaled subtly, maintaining her elegant, sweet smile. "Your taste is always impeccable." Annie smiled and stepped back, shouting at the door, "Dressing room number 6, never mind, I'll go get it myself." The maids began to get busy, one in charge of the long dress, one in charge of the jewelry, one in charge of the shoes, one in charge of the veil, one doing makeup for Miss Audrey, and one considering the hairstyle. When preparations were nearly complete, the Count Hall, wearing a dark brown vest, appeared at the door. He wore a hat of the same color, had a neat little mustache, his blue eyes full of laughter, but the relaxed muscles, the protruding belly, and the increasingly evident laugh lines ruthlessly destroyed his youthful handsomeness. "The brightest gem of Beckland, it's time for us to set off." Count Hall stood at the entrance, tapping twice on the open door. "Dad, don't call me that." Audrey stood up with the help of the maid, deliberately showing a bit of distress. "Then my beautiful little princess, it's time to leave." Count Hall bent his left arm, signaling Audrey to hold on to. Audrey shook her head with a light smile. "This is the position of Mrs. Hall, the Countess, my dear mother." "Then this side." Count Hall smiled again and bent his right arm. "This is the pride of a father." Pritz Harbor, Oak Island, Royal Navy Base. When Audrey stepped out of the carriage with her father's arm, she was suddenly shocked by the giant in front of her. In the military port not far away, there was a towering battleship shimmering with metallic light. It had no sails, only a lookout tower, and 2 towering chimneys, and 2 open-air gun turrets at the front and back. It was so majestic, so huge, that the nearby sailing battleships were like newborn dwarfs surrounding a giant. Storm above, oh, my lord. Ironclad. A sound of exclamation interwoven. Audrey also felt the same shock. It was a miracle created by mankind, an unprecedented maritime miracle. After an unknown period of time, the nobles, ministers, and members of the lower house recovered. At this time, a black spot in mid-air grew larger, gradually occupying a third of the sky, occupying everyone's sight, making the atmosphere suddenly solemn. This was a huge object floating in mid-air, with extremely smooth and beautiful lines, the whole painted in deep blue, a sturdy and light alloy skeleton supporting the cotton cloth with a hydrogen bag. Underneath was a cabin with machine gun ports, bomb ports, and flat gun ports. The exaggerated humming of the high combustion steam engine and the crazy spinning sound of the tail blades formed a heart-shaking movement. The royal family's airship had arrived, bringing with it the majesty of looking down on everything from above. A vertical downward handle with a ruby crown, a sword of judgment emblem on both sides of the cabin reflected the sunlight. This was a symbol of the Augustus family that had been passed down for a long time and could be traced back to the last century. Audrey was not yet 18, and had not participated in the introduction ceremony, officially entering the social scene of Beckland under the guidance of the Queen, declaring adulthood, and could only quietly watch from the original place, not allowed to approach. However, she didn't care too much, even feeling relaxed because she didn't have to face the princes. The miracle of mankind conquering the sky landed steadily, and the first to come down the ladder were the vigorous young guards. They were dressed in red military uniforms, white trousers, had medals, and held rifles, forming 2 columns to wait for the arrival of King George III and the Queen, Prince, and Princess. Audrey had seen big figures before and had no interest in them. Instead, her eyes wandered and looked at the 2 black armored knights who were like statues next to the king. In this era of steel, steam, and guns, there were still guys who insisted on wearing full armor. The cold metallic luster and the deep black helmet all gave a heavy, majestic, and obligatory feeling. Could it be a higher order punishment knight? Audrey flashed through the fragments of her elders' casual conversations at home, wanting to see for herself, but not daring to approach. With the arrival of the royal family, the ceremony finally began, and the current prime minister, Lord Aegishide Nigan, walked to the front of everyone. He was a member of the Conservative Party, one of only 2 non-noble figures to become prime minister so far, and was granted a baronetcy for his outstanding contributions. Of course, Audrey knew more. Aegishide's brother, a major supporter of the Conservative Party, was called Paulus Nigan, the Duke of Nigan. Of this generation, Aegishide was in his 50s, tall and thin, with thinning hair and sharp eyes. After scanning the crowd, he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe you have already seen that this is an ironclad ship capable of overturning the era. It is 101 meters long, 21 meters wide, with a high dry hull design. The main armor belt is 457 mm thick, the displacement is 10,060 tons, there are 4 305 mm main guns at the front and back. In addition, there are 6 rapid-fire guns, 12 6-pound guns, 18 6-barreled machine guns, 4 torpedo launch tubes, and the speed can reach 16 knots. It will be the true overlord, it will conquer the ocean." The nobles, ministers, and members of parliament were in a stir. Just the prime minister's description was enough for them to imagine the terror of this ironclad ship, let alone the real thing in front of them. Aegishide showed a slight smile, gave a few more speeches, and then saluted King George III, saying, "Your Majesty, please name it. Starting from Pritz Harbor, let's call it the Pritz." George III looked very pleased. Pritz. Pritz. From the Minister of the Navy, the Commander-in-Chief of the Royal Navy, this name spread in turn, finally reaching the ironclad ship, where officers and soldiers cheered in unison, "Pritz." In the festive atmosphere, the salute was fired, and George III issued the order for the maiden voyage and test fire. The horn sounded, and thick smoke spurted out from the chimney, and the movement of the machinery could be faintly heard. The giant ship set sail. When it sailed out of the harbor and used the 2 main guns on the bow to bombard the uninhabited island in front, everyone was shocked. Boom. 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 The ground seemed to shake, dust rushed into the sky, the hurricane rampaged out, stirring up waves. Prime Minister Aegishide turned his head in satisfaction and said to the nobles, ministers, and members of parliament, "From now on, those 7 pirates who call themselves generals, those 4 pirates who presumptuously call themselves kings, can only tremble and wait for the end. Their era is over. Even if they have more or less extraordinary power, have ghost or cursed ships, the only ones who can dominate the ocean are ironclad ships." At this time, Aegishide's chief secretary asked intentionally, "Can't they build their own ironclad ships?" Some nobles and members of parliament nodded in agreement, thinking it was not impossible. Aegishide immediately showed a smile, slowly shaking his head and said, "Impossible, never possible. To build such an ironclad ship requires 3 large coal and steel complexes, 20 or more steel factories, 60 scientists from the Beckland Cannon Research Institute and the Pritz Ship Research Institute and more senior engineers, 2 royal shipyards and their nearly 100 affiliated parts factories, a navy department, a shipbuilding committee, a cabinet, a king with excellent vision and determination, and a great country with an annual steel output of 12 million tons. Pirates will never be able to do it." Saying this, he paused for a moment, then raised his arms and shouted passionately, "Ladies and gentlemen, the era of battleships and cannons has arrived." After a half-hour rest, Zhou Mingrui, who claims to be Klein, finally recuperated. During this time, he discovered 4 black dots on the back of his right hand, forming a small square. These 4 dots faded from dark to light, disappearing quickly, but Klein knew they were still hiding in his body, waiting to be awakened. 4 points, a square, could it be the correspondence of the 4 corners and 4 main dishes? In the future, I won't need to prepare the main dish, I can directly step on the spell. Klein had a vague guess. This seemed good, but having something strange and unexplained in his body always provoked fear. When he thought about the inexplicable square technique on Earth that could produce effects here, about his strange travel through dreams, about the mysterious, psychedelic foggy world that represented an unknown, about the whispers that hovered around him during the ceremony, driving him almost mad, Klein shivered uncontrollably, even in the hot weather at the end of June. He had once heard a saying, "The oldest and strongest human emotion is fear, and the oldest and strongest fear is fear of the unknown." Now, he deeply experienced the fear stemming from the unknown, unprecedented, irresistible. He had a strong urge to touch the mysterious realm, to learn more, to break the unknown, but also had the idea of burying his head and pretending nothing had happened. The sun was shining brightly outside the window, casting a layer of gold dust on the desk. Klein gazed there as if he had touched a bit of warmth and hoped. He relaxed a little, and immediately felt a surge of fatigue, like a tidal wave. The sleepless night before and the consumption just now made his eyelids heavy as lead. Unable to stop drooping, shaking his head, Klein reached out to support the edge of the table. Without cleaning up the rye bread at the 4 corners, he staggered to his bunk. As soon as he lay down and touched the pillow, he fell into a deep sleep. Gurgle. Gurgle. Hunger woke Klein up. He opened his eyes, feeling refreshed. Except for a slight headache. He rubbed his temples, sat up, feeling like he could eat a whole cow while straightening the creases in his clothes. He returned to the desk and picked up the silver pocket watch with a vine pattern. Snap, the lid popped open, and the second hand ticked away. 12:30, I've slept for over 3 hours. Klein swallowed, put the pocket watch back in his linen shirt pocket. I in the northern continent, a day is also divided into 24 hours, each hour 60 minutes, each minute 60 seconds. Whether each second is the same length as on Earth, Klein did not know. For him, at this time, even the words, mystical studies, ceremony, foggy world, could not enter his mind. The most important thing was food, food. Only with a full stomach can he think of a solution. Only then can he do things. Without hesitation, Klein picked up the rye bread from four corners, shook off a little dust, and planned to use one as his lunch. Due to the custom of sharing food offerings in his hometown, and the 4 loaves of rye bread looked unchanged, he thought it was better to be frugal when he only had 5 pennies left in his pocket. Of course, this was also subtly influenced by the original owner's memory fragments and living habits, since gas was too expensive, and it was heartbreaking to use it for lighting. He moved out the stove, added some coal, and Klein paced back and forth, waiting for the water to boil. That kind of rye bread, if eaten dry, would be choking. Ah, do I have to live on black bread in the morning, black bread at noon, and only be able to eat meat at night? No, if it wasn't for Melissa considering my upcoming interview, I could only eat meat twice a week. Klein looked around, unable to think about serious matters due to hunger. Thinking of that pound of lamb, his eyes seemed to turn green as he looked at the cupboard. No, I have to wait for Melissa to eat it together. Klein shook his head vigorously, negating the idea of cutting half of it now. As a single dog wandering in the big city, although he mainly eats out, he has honed basic cooking skills, which are not delicious, but enough. Turning around, Klein decided to keep it out of sight. Just then, he suddenly remembered that he had bought tender peas and potatoes in the morning. Potatoes. Klein had an inspiration instantly, turned around like a whirlwind, rushed to the cupboard, and took out 2 potatoes from the few left. He first went to the public washroom to clean the skin of the potatoes, then directly put them in the pot with the water to boil together. After a good while, he took the seasoning box out of the cupboard, opened the lid, and sprinkled a little yellow and coarse salt into the water. After patiently waiting for a few more minutes, Klein lifted the kettle, poured the not-so soup into several cups, poured it into a big bowl, and finally forked out the 2 potatoes and placed them on the table. He peeled a bit of skin and blew on it. The aroma of the cooked potato slowly filled the air, stirring his appetite. Saliva secreted crazily. Klein couldn't wait for only half of it to be peeled, and couldn't wait for the potato to cool down a bit. He picked it up and took a big bite. Soft, fragrant, sweet aftertaste. Klein's heart was instantly filled with emotion. He wolfed down the 2 potatoes, even eating some of the skin. Only then did he pick up the big bowl and take a satisfying sip of the soup. The light saltiness washed away the dryness in his mouth. I used to love eating like this when I was a kid. Klein silently sighed while tearing the rye bread and dipping it in that soup. Perhaps because the previous ceremony consumed too much, he ate 2 loaves, a full pound. After drinking that soup and cleaning up, Klein felt completely revived, experiencing the joy of being human again, and enjoying the brilliance of the sun. He sat back at his desk and began to think about what he should do next. I can't escape. I must find a way to touch the mysterious realm, to become the extraordinary person mentioned by justice and the hanged man. I have to overcome the fear caused by the unknown. The only way at present is to wait for the next gathering, to see if I can overhear the formula of the audience potion or other mysterious knowledge. There are still 4 days until Monday. Before that, I have to face the problem of the original owner himself. Why did he commit suicide? What did he encounter? Unable to travel back and leave, Klein picked up the open notebook, planning to flip through it for any clues, to see if he could complete the fragmented memories. Clearly, the original owner had the habit of keeping notes and using the notebook as a diary. Klein knew that the cabinet acting as the right leg of the desk was full of completed notebooks. This one was used from May 10th. The most content at the beginning was about school, about tutors, about knowledge. May 12th, Mr. Azak mentioned that the common language of the Byron Empire in the southern continent also originated from the ancient Fusak language, which is a branch of the giant language. Why is that? Did all sentient beings once use the same language? No, this must be wrong. Even in the records of the Revelation of Night and the Book of Storm, in the times older than the ancient times, giants were not the only rulers of the continent. There were also elves, different species, and dragons. Well, these are just legends, just mythological stories. On May 16th, Senior Associate Professor Cohen and Mr. Ask were debating the inevitability of the steam era. Mr. Ask argued that it had an element of chance. Had it not been for the sudden emergence of Emperor Russell, perhaps the northern continent would still be like the southern continent, remaining in the era of cold weapons. The professor believed that he overemphasized the role of individuals. He believed that with the development of the times, even without Emperor Russell, there would be Emperor Robert. In any case, the steam era might be late, but it would definitely come. As for their debate, I felt it was meaningless. I prefer to discover new things, to restore the history that is shrouded in fog. Perhaps I should not study history, but archaeology. On May 29th, Welch found me. He said he had obtained a notebook from the 4th epoch. My goddess, a notebook from the fourth epoch. He didn't want to ask his classmates from the archaeology department for help, he wanted to ask me and Naya to help decipher the contents. How could I possibly refuse such a thing? Of course, it will have to wait until after the graduation defense. I can't be distracted at this time. Upon reading this, Klein's spirit was lifted. Compared to the previous historical notes and ideological debates, the newly appeared Fourth Epoch notebook was more likely to be the cause of the original owner's suicide. The Fourth Epoch was the era before the current Iron Black Epoch. The history of it is full of mystery, with many gaps, even the unearthed tombs, ancient cities and documents are few and far between. Historians and archaeologists can only rely on the vague, faith-based theological scriptures of the seven churches to piece together a bit of the original appearance, knowing the existence of the Solomon Empire, the Tudor dynasty, the Trendester Empire. Klein, who was determined to crack the mystery and restore history, had no interest in the more mythical first three epochs, only cared about the fourth epoch, also known as the Age of the Gods. His excitement can be imagined. Looking at it this way, the original owner was too concerned about the job interview. It was not necessary. Klein couldn't help but sigh. At present, universities are still rare, and most of the students are children of nobles and wealthy families. Even if civilians enter, even if they are discriminated against because of their status and are not included in others' social circles, as long as the person himself is not extreme, they can still gain certain resources of contacts through group discussions and collective activities. These are extremely valuable resources, for example, Welch. McVitie is the son of a banker in Constance City in the Intersea County of the Rune Kingdom. He is generous and generous. Because he often does homework and reports in the same group with Klein and Naya, he is used to asking them for help. Without thinking too much, Klein continued to read the notes. June 18th, graduation. Goodbye, my Hoi University. June 19th, I saw that notebook. After comparing the structure and roots, I found that it is a variant of the ancient Fussac language. To be more precise, the ancient Fussac language has been subtly evolving over more than 1,000 years. June 20th, we deciphered the content of the first page. The author is a member of a family called Antigonus. June 21st, he mentioned the Black Emperor. This completely contradicts the era deduced from the previous content. Could it be that the professor's view is wrong, and the Black Emperor is actually the common title of every emperor of the Solomon Empire? June 22nd, this Antigonus family seems to have a prominent position in the Solomon Empire. The owner of the notebook mentioned that he was conducting a secret transaction with someone called Tudor. Tudor? The Tudor dynasty? June 23rd, I control myself not to think about that notebook, not to go to Welch's place. I have to prepare for the interview. This is a very important matter. June 24th, Naya told me that they have new gains. I think I should go and take a look. June 25th, from the newly deciphered content, the owner of the notebook accepted a task, going to the main peak of the Hornix mountain range, to visit the country of night at the top. My goddess, the main peak of the Hornix mountain range is over 6,000 meters high. How can there be a country? How do they survive? June 26th, are all these strange things real? At this point, the notes ended. Zhou Mingrui crossed over on the early morning of June 28th. That is to say, there is actually a note for June 27th, which is that sentence, everyone will die, including me. Klein turned to the first page he saw, made a slightly creepy judgment that he felt that to solve the mystery of the original owner's suicide, he should visit Welch and take another look at the content of the ancient notes. But with his rich experience from movies and TV shows, he felt that if he went, and if it was indeed related, he would most likely encounter unknown dangers. Those who knew the castle was haunted but still went to die were a warning. But not going is not an option. Evasion never solves the problem, it only makes things accumulate until they break and completely drown oneself. Call the police? I can't say I committed suicide, can I? Thump, thump, thump. Suddenly, there was a frantic and powerful knock at the door. Klein sat up abruptly, listening attentively. Thump, thump, thump. The knocking echoed in the empty and desolate hallway. Who? Klein, preoccupied with the mysterious suicide of the original owner and the unknown dangers he might encounter, instinctively reached into his drawer and grabbed the revolver upon hearing the sudden knock at the door. He asked warily. There was a 2-second silence outside the door, then a slightly shrill voice shouted in a Hao accent, "Built. Montagut." There was a pause in the voice, then it added, "Police. Built. Montagut." As the name entered his ears, Klein immediately thought of its owner. He was one of the policemen in charge of the block where the apartment was located, a rough and violent man who loved to use his fists. Perhaps only such people could deter the drunkards, thieves, part-time thieves, and villains and hooligans in the area, and his unique voice was one of his tags. "All right, I'm coming." Klein responded loudly. He was about to throw the revolver back into the drawer, but thinking that the police outside didn't know why they were here and there might be a search, he carefully ran to the stove where the embers had long since died out and put the gun in. Then, he picked up the small basket of coal, shook a few pieces into the stove to cover the gun, and finally put the kettle on top to cover everything. After all this, he straightened his clothes, quickly approached the door, and mumbled as he opened it, "Sorry, I was just napping." Outside the door stood 4 policemen in black and white uniforms, wearing badge soft hats. "Built." Montagut, with his brown-yellow sideburns, coughed and said to Klein, "These 3 officers have something to ask you." "Officers?" Klein reflexively looked at the shoulder badges of the other 3 and found that 2 of them had 3 silver hexagonal stars, and 1 had 2, all of which looked more senior than Built. Montagut, who only had 3 V-shaped tags. As a history student, Klein didn't know much about the ranks of police shoulder badges, and only knew that Built. Montagut often boasted that he was a senior police chief. So, are those 3 inspector level? Influenced by his older brother Benson and Welch and other classmates, Klein still knew a little bit of common sense. He stepped aside and pointed to the room and said, "Please come in." "What's the matter?" The leading officer among the 3 was a middle-aged man with sharp eyes that seemed to penetrate the soul, making people involuntarily afraid. He had obvious wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, and his shallow brown hair was visible under the edge of his hat. He was looking around the room on his own, and asked in a deep voice, "You know Welch McGovern, right? What happened to him?" Klein's heart trembled, and he blurted out, "It's me asking you." The authoritative middle-aged officer looked sternly. The officer with the same 3-star shoulder badge next to him looked at Klein and smiled gently. "Don't be nervous, we're just asking routinely." This officer was in his 30s, with a straight nose, and his gray eyes gave a deep feeling that was hard to describe, like a lake in an ancient forest where few people asked. Klein took a deep breath and organized his language. "If you're referring to the graduate of Hoy University, Welch McGovern from Conston, then I'm sure I know him. We were classmates, following the same mentor, Senior Associate Professor Quinton Cohen. In the Rune Kingdom, professor is not just a title, but also a position, just like the combination of professor and department head on Earth. That is to say, a department in a university can only have 1 professor, and associate professors want to turn positive. They can only wait for their immediate boss to retire, or squeeze the other party away with their ability. In order to retain talents. After many years of exploration, the Kingdom Higher Education Committee added a senior associate professor to the 3-level system of lecturer, associate professor, and professor, giving men and women who are academically high or old enough but unable to become professors. As he said this, Klein looked into the eyes of the middle-aged officer, thought for a second, and then said, "To be honest, our relationship is not bad. During this period, he and I, and Naya, often meet to decipher and discuss the 4th era document he got." "A note, officer, what happened to him?" The middle-aged officer didn't answer, but turned his head to look at his gray-eyed companion. The gray-eyed officer, who was also wearing a badge soft hat and had an ordinary face, answered calmly, "I'm sorry, Mr. Welch has passed away." How could it be? Although he had some premonitions, Klein couldn't help but exclaim, "Did Welch die like the original owner of the body? This is a bit scary." "And Naya?" Klein hurriedly asked. "Miss Naya has also passed away." The gray-eyed officer said calmly, "They both died in Mr. Welch's residence." "Killed?" Klein had a vague guess, perhaps it was suicide. The gray-eyed officer shook his head. "No, according to the scene, they committed suicide. Mr. Welch hit his head against the wall many times, and the wall was full of blood. Miss Naya drowned herself in a basin of water, the kind used for washing faces." "It's impossible." Klein listened with goosebumps, as if he could imagine the eerie scene. The girl knelt on the chair, buried her face in the washbasin full of water, her brown hair draped softly, swaying with the wind, but she didn't move at all. Welch lay on the ground, his eyes staring dead at the ceiling, his forehead completely shattered, covered in blood, and the marks on the wall where he had hit were one after another, bloody. The gray-eyed officer moved his mouth and said, "We also think so, but the autopsy results and the scene exclude factors such as drugs and external forces. I mean Mr. Welch, Miss Naya did not have any signs of resistance." Before Klein could open his mouth again, he stepped into the room and asked casually, "When was the last time you saw Mr. Welch or Miss Naya?" He signaled his companion with 2 silver stars with his eyes as he spoke. That was a young officer, about the same size as Klein, with black temples and green eyes, good-looking, with the romantic air of a poet. Upon hearing the question, Klein quickly thought about how to answer. "It should be June 26th. We jointly deciphered a new note content. After that, I went home to prepare for the interview on the 30th, the history department of Tianjin University. Tianjin City is known as the City of Universities, with 2 universities, Tianjin and Hoi, technical schools, law schools, business schools, second only to the capital Backland. As soon as he finished speaking, he saw from the corner of his eye that the young officer had walked to the desk and picked up the note that looked more like a diary. "Damn. Forgot to hide it." Klein shouted, "You!" The young officer smiled back at him, but did not stop flipping through the note. The gray-eyed officer explained, "This is a necessary procedure." At this point, Built Montagut and the stern middle-aged officer just stood by and watched. without interjecting or assisting in the search. Where's your search warrant? Klein was going to question like this, but after thinking about it carefully, it seemed that the judicial system of the Rune Kingdom had not evolved the search warrant. At least he didn't know if there was one. After all, even the police force had only been established for 15 or 16 years. When the original owner was a child, it was still called a security officer. Klein couldn't stop it, and watched as the young officer quickly flipped through his note, and the gray-eyed officer didn't ask any more questions. What a strange thing. The young officer flipped to the end and suddenly asked, "And what does this sentence mean? Everyone will die, including me. Isn't it common sense that everyone will die except for the gods?" Klein was originally going to prevaricate, but suddenly remembered that he had originally planned to connect with the police to guard against possible dangers, but was struggling for a reason, an excuse. In less than a second, he made a decision, covered his forehead with his hand, and answered in a pained voice, "I don't know, I really don't know. When I woke up this morning, I felt something was wrong with me, like I had forgotten some things, especially the things that happened in the last few days, and I even don't know why I wrote such a sentence." Sometimes, honesty is the best solution. Of course, honesty requires skill. What can be said and what can't be said is one aspect, and what to say first and how to say it is another aspect. As a keyboard expert, Klein has also studied some rhetoric. Absurd. Do you think we're fools? Built. Montagut angrily interrupted. He couldn't help it anymore. This lie was too crude. It was an insult to their intelligence. You'd better pretend to be mentally ill than pretend to have amnesia. Really? Klein responded calmly to Montagut and the middle-aged officer's gaze. This is really true. There might be a possibility. At this time, the gray-eyed officer slowly spoke. What? He believed it. Klein was surprised himself. The gray-eyed officer smiled at him and said, "In a few days, an expert will come. Believe me, she should be able to help you recall the lost memory." Expert? Help recall? In the field of psychology? Klein frowned. What if he remembers my Earth memory? He suddenly felt a toothache. The young officer put down the note, searched the desk and the room again. Fortunately, he focused on the books and didn't lift the kettle to take a look. "All right, Mr. Klein, thank you for your cooperation. For the next few days, you'd better not leave Tianjin. If you have to, please notify Officer Montagut, otherwise, you will become a fugitive." The gray-eyed officer finally reminded that is this the end? Is it over for today? Won't you ask more, investigate more? Or take me back to the police station for torture? Klein was at a loss for a moment. However, he also wanted to solve the eerie incident brought by Welch, so he nodded and said, "No problem." The officers left the room one by one. The young man at the end suddenly patted Klein's shoulder. "Good, very lucky." "What?" Klein looked confused. The green-eyed officer with a poet's air smiled and said, "Usually in such an event, it's normal for all the parties involved to die. We're very happy, and very lucky, to see you still alive." After that, he walked out of the room, politely closing the door behind him. "All dead is normal? Very happy I'm still alive. Very lucky I'm still alive." On this afternoon in June, Klein felt a chill all over his body.